Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Lance. I'm with Plan RVA, and this is the Wednesday, October 25th meeting of the Public Transportation Workgroup. So we'll start with introductions. We'll start over here.
Hi, I'm Ashley Austin, and I'm with Henrico County. I'm a senior transportation planner.
I'm Carrie. I'm with Plan RVA. I'm a planner.
I'm Miles Bushing with Plan RVA.
Barbara J. Cox, Plan RVA.
Janice Scott, Plan RVA.
And Molly Fry, Plan RVA.
And how about for our folks online or viewing virtually?
This is Mike Cirillo with Powhatan County.
Yeah,
Tim Rodriguez with Hanover County.
Amy Inman, Kent County.
Austin Goin, Goochland County.
John O'Keefe, Ride Finders.
Adrian Torres, GRTC.
Stephen Monks, GRTC.
Tiffany Dubinsky. Sorry, Corey. Tiffany Dubinsky with DRPT.
All right, well, thanks, everyone. We appreciate you being with us this afternoon. I'm going to read this hopefully for one time only, and then we will dispense with it, and that is the statement for virtual participation. Meetings of the RRTPO are accessible to the public in a virtual format in accordance with provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-37083. We remain committed to providing members of the public accessibility and opportunity to participate. Staff provides notices of each meeting to members and the public through electronic posting on the Plan RVA website and email distribution of notice to members, alternates, and known interested parties, including the media. Each meeting is recorded. Audio and visual recordings and meeting materials will be posted on the Plan RVA website within 48 hours of each meeting. Any member of the public participating as an observer during a meeting may submit comments or questions at any time prior to or during the meeting via email at the appropriate email address. All comments and questions submitted will be reviewed and either read aloud or summarized during the meeting and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. To the extent practical, responses will be provided or posted on the Plan RVA website. We ask that individuals identify themselves first when speaking so we can more accurately record the activities of the meeting. All lines should be muted to minimize additional noise and feedback. By providing this statement, staff certifies that we have followed the approved procedures for appropriate notice of each meeting and the means by which we are convening. Please let us know if you have any questions regarding the process for assuring effective facilitation of each meeting or for how members of the public may participate. And we've done the roll call. Do we have any proposed amendments to our meeting agenda before we move on? All right, hearing none, we will, the next item on here is open public comment. I don't know if we have anybody, but we will certainly allow anybody to offer public comment at this time, whether virtually or here in the room. Okay, we will now move to the review and discussion of our work group, and that will be by Miles Bushing.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So I just want to take a few minutes to give everyone an overview of why we're here, why we've reconvened this working group, and the policy directive from the policy board and what we're supposed to be looking at. So backing up a few years, the Central Virginia Transportation Authority was established, and part of that is that 15% of the funding goes to GRTC. Through that process, GRTC is also required to plan how they're going to use that funding. So that's the regional public transportation plan that we've been developing annually as they look at how that funding is going to be used. Part of that, one of the recommendations in the fiscal year 22 plan was to look at microtransit. And so there was the microtransit study that was born out of that. This working group actually came together to help steer some of that. There were a couple working group meetings to review the study for that program. Since that time, we have heard some concerns expressed by members of the policy board and from some of the staff members as well that really isn't quite meeting the need of what the localities feel is needed in their area. And so at the September policy board meeting, we had a presentation from DRPT, which went over essentially the pipeline to transit of how projects can go from a study into demo, into actual implementation and long-term service. And Tiffany has graciously volunteered to share that again today with you guys. But the policy board looked at that and they basically said, we want this, but we want to figure out how to do it for the entire region. So the directive from the policy board is to look at public transportation for the region that is sustainable and fiscally constrained while making use of the tools that are in the DRPT presentation. So that's essentially the directive. That's where we are today. So what we're trying to figure out is really what are those needs, what are our next steps, and how can we combine these programs to make that into a reality. So that's in essence what we're here for today. I'm happy to answer any questions, but otherwise I'll turn it over to Tiffany to share kind of the framework of what we're working within.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Miles. I don't even think I could have summarized that better myself. So I want to keep it pretty informal compared to how I had presented my slides show to the policy board. As technical staff, I think have a much easier approach to talk to you all about what we should consider in terms of next steps, and then how DRPT, and I also have Mitch Huber, who is also one of our statewide transit planners here, to provide any kind of assistance as we kind of figure out what you all as a working group would like to pursue. So this is a presentation that I provided, and the layout that I gave in terms of the approach was, if you go to the next slide, first kind of describing what kind of funding programs or opportunities that we have at DRPT. In particular, ones that we have had actively involved with introduction of new transit service have been technical assistance, demonstration project assistance, and then transit ridership incentive program, or TRIP. I did also mention that there was workforce development grants that were available, because there's an essential consideration of that as you go through testing new concepts or pilots for transit. There is also a component about how do you maintain that? How do you build up your current resources and capacity to support transit when you've not had that before? And so I always recommend thinking about internships, apprenticeships, trainings, and other opportunities that could help if you are going to continue providing some sort of transit service in your area. But as I walk through, if you get to the next slide, we first went over the workforce development program. And this one, we had initially always had it labeled as intern. So it had by default geared itself to be more towards planning and scheduling, what we would typically think of in terms of internships. But we realized that we have the flexibility in the code to be able to expand the utility, and especially post-COVID, we found that there was more needs that were outside of just a standard internship position. So if you wanted to help fund, a training course that would maybe help with some of your operators, even just CDL training and developing those resources, this was the program to expand that. This is not going to be quite as relevant to our discussion today, but it is helpful to kind of think about all facets of what goes into new transit service. So I always think it's important to mention this point. If you go to the next slide, that talks about kind of the first step of what we see whenever there is an interest in terms of introducing any kind of new transportation service, transit service, and that's technical assistance. This is where a lot of our MPOs, as well as transit agencies and other regional partners, start the conversation about looking at what's the feasibility of any kind of transit or transportation service. So I know that a lot of discussion has been about mobility services, specialized transportation, and microtransit. And I said to the policy board that I've always encouraged to keep an open mind about what that transportation solution could look like for you. As someone who's done a lot of microtransit over the past few years, you would think that I probably would encourage that, but I also want to be able to kind of manage the expectation that microtransit is not a kind of a one size fits all. It's not always the best solution, but it is an option in order to help expand service or coverage. So when you look at technical assistance, this is probably the first step that I would have you all consider as a group. Thinking about how you want to look at a transit feasibility study for our rural localities here in the Richmond region. And, while the regional public transportation plan that GRTC does, as well as efforts with the regional transit vision plan, I have to remember all of the work that y'all have done, as well as the long range transportation plans, there's been a lot of coverage, but there hasn't been one that really has focused in on transportation, like in terms of public transit. So that was kind of the initial step that I think the policy board was trying to discover, is that really we should look at a study to see for each locality, whether it's going to be just a larger rural transit feasibility study or for individual rural localities, but having it specifically by the locality, seeing what would be some viable options for consideration. And so that would be where technical assistance comes in. We provide a 50% state match, and then there's a 50% local match component. We have seen MPOs also apply where they've used some of their Section 5303 funding in order to help reduce the local match burden on that as well. But this is kind of that first step that I would encourage you all to think about, is just really getting into a study that would be looking at what each rural locality may need or what it would look like to introduce any kind of new transportation service into the area, and how that would also work within the existing service. I think I should always make sure that when we think about the service that we're providing to our rural localities, we also want to see the connectivity in terms of the whole region, and then also what's existing within kind of the urban center of the Richmond region. I should start by saying that the timing is excellent, and I mentioned this to the policy board, that we are heading up into our fiscal year 2025 grant cycle that opens up December 1st. And so there's a little bit of time if you wanted to try to put in an application. Deadline's February 1st. So there's time to come in and start this conversation, start a study, and apply for funding this cycle. But if there's not enough consensus on that, there's always next year as well. And then trying to think of other opportunities that are outside of our program, but can be looped in. But technical assistance is kind of that first step I wanted to mention. And then the next slide goes into kind of that next phase. If you do a technical assistance, looking at transit feasibility, identifying a locally preferred alternative or recommended service or pilot, then you would really have enough information to apply for what is called our demonstration project program. I always just call it demo for short. And this program here was really where you see a lot of our pilots. So anything that DRPT has done related to microtransit, to any kind of new express route service. This is also where we did our low-speed automated shuttle in Fairfax County, driver assistance systems. This is kind of the large deployment and implementation program when you're trying to test a concept or kind of a technology. Microtransit has been funded through this program in particular, so this is kind of that next step in terms of the pipeline. If you go through a study and you find that there's some options that you would like to pursue, this would be the next step that you would look at, and this would be something you would apply in. If we're going by FY25, that you apply for technical assistance, timing would ideally be FY26 or sooner if you don't want to necessarily go through DRPT's route. In general, we always encourage about roughly 12 to 18 months. That builds in some time for planning. If you have to procure services as well, we are a little lenient depending on the scale of your demonstration pilot. But we do encourage at least 1 full year of revenue service if you're going to test some new services, to make sure that you get enough information and an understanding of the demand that's involved, or kind of the performance data that you want to collect related to the pilot. The match rate here, we provide up to 80% state match, and then there's 20% local match. And in particular, on all these slides, there are different eligible applicants. So I want to make sure that you highlight that it's a larger list of eligible applicants for technical assistance, but demonstration is really much particular to those who can own or operate any kind of transit service. Because we've definitely had people try to apply that had no jurisdiction to run service in an area. Next slide. So I mentioned that we talk about microtransit. We define demonstration within 2 different service or kind of types. Previously, I would say probably like 6-7 years ago before I started at DRPT, this was purely for new service. So you were thinking your commuter routes, express routes, or just introduction of maybe some new service in an area that wasn't currently being served. That was kind of the caveat. We didn't want this to also revive discontinued routes, or that it would be a different way to fund something that could kind of go through the standard state and federal programs for public transportation. But we saw that there was a need to expand. So type 2 is kind of where you'll start seeing some of the more specialized transportation options. So we call it innovation and technology because in addition to like microtransit and low speed shuttles and connected automated vehicles, we have seen some other unique applications come through related to automated wheelchair lifts on buses, retrofitting of certain cameras, or even algorithms for traffic to do some more real-time information on intersections. So this is kind of that type 2 is kind of where if there's a concept or an idea that hasn't really been tested, that's where a lot of our applicants apply through. For microtransit, at this point, it still is being tested as a proof of concept. So we would kind of put it under type 2, but that's just more for us in terms of kind of recording and collecting the data over time of how demonstration projects have been funded, whether it's through just typical news service or otherwise. Next slide. The last step that I had mentioned is that typically when you finish your demo within 18 months or so, you're considering, okay, whether or not it's successful or whether you want to continue operations. We have found that since we introduced the Transit Ridership Incentive Program as part of the 2020 Transportation Omnibus Bill, that there's been this natural connection of moving it into TRIP if it's eligible. So for a lot of considerations, if you are thinking under regional connectivity and zero fare or low income, those were the initial two under TRIP. Under regional connectivity, we saw that what we thought would be something that was a highly subscribed program, COVID hit. And so we saw that more people were just thinking more about zero fare. And so we got a lot of applications, including GRTC. So since then, people have thought a little bit more creatively about regional connectivity. If you go to the next slide, I think we talk a little bit about the eligible types and in the eligible areas. Richmond, because of its current urbanized area population distinctions, it is an eligible area for looking at regional connectivity. The easiest way I describe it is that it needs to cross at least between two different localities to be considered regional connectivity. Besides that, there are some other criteria to it, but microtransit, specialized transportation, as well as express routes, BRT, a lot of those considerations have been also considered and funded through TRIP. Now, TRIP has now only been through its fourth year or so, so we're still seeing new ideas that come through. But I mentioned this now over the past year just because if you are not 100% sure after your demo, there's still an opportunity to continue at a subsidized rate. There's a step down in terms of the state match versus local match over a series of years. And as you see at the bottom bullet there under funding duration, it's up to 5 years. But it gives you enough time to build up more information about the pilot, to be able to make the business case to your stakeholders, and then ultimately decide if this is going to be something that you can sustain over time on your own. So it's always important to kind of mention TRIP, just because that's where we're kind of seeing that natural connection. If you go, not the next slide, but this last one here, one more. This one right here. So this is kind of where I will leave it because I want to make sure that we have enough time to be able to kind of answer any questions about this. But this was kind of the key takeaway that I wanted to provide to the policy board when I present in September. It's kind of what we're seeing as this natural pipeline of what DRPT offers and what we've seen localities and agencies take advantage of in terms of introducing any kind of new transportation service within their area. And so starting from technical assistance, demonstration, and then whether that is going to include TRIP depends on its eligibility. But in the long term, you also then have to think about the operational service. How do you transition that into regular operations with a provider? The rest of my slides really only had a little bit about just an example of projects that we have done over the years. So there's a list of everything. So McAfee Knob, Trailhead Shuttle, which is in Roanoke County. A lot of people are familiar with Action Express, which runs with under Central Shendo or PDC. Shengo, which actually kind of followed that pipeline of technical assistance up to demonstration and now are slowly folding into regular operations within Shenandoah County. and that's with Northern Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission, and a number of microtransit deployments, including here in Richmond. So I think I'll stop there. I see, Dorona, you have your hand up. Maybe. Well, while we wait for Dorona to maybe go off mute, did anyone else have any initial questions or thoughts? I guess that's kind of the first. Oh, there you are, Dorona.
Sorry, as soon as I got up, I heard you say my name. I'm like, oopsie. Yeah, so I just ran to get a map of the urbanized area that I guess would be eligible for 5307 and some of these programs that we're talking about. But is 5311 eligible to any of these rural localities for things that they want to do?
So we haven't talked about that. So that is a discussion that this more about the operational sustainability, about thinking about whether you would apply for 5311, which is the funding for rural transit operations. They are eligible. It's just a matter of identifying the provider who could be the ones that kind of administer and manage those funds. That is to say, yeah, there's eligibility for 5311, but that would have to be explored if they're interested in kind of sustaining the transit service. Now, whether or not that's GRTC, that's a larger discussion about whether or not they are interested in entering into 5311 because they only manage 5307 currently. And then there's a lot of considerations because of the overall statewide 5311 pot and what would be available to them if they applied.
Yeah, and that was key because, I mean, I don't want to put all the auspice on, 5307 and GRTC and then these state programs, but it seems that the 5311 is, you have these set providers and that money is kind of allocated between them. But if there's new providers, I would be interested in seeing how we could integrate both of those funds because I think that there's some areas in the counties that would benefit from a model that's more along the rural 5311 format versus, and I know we could turn any of these models, well, not any of them, not the fixed route, but some of the deviated and some of the less, and maybe the micro transit into those type of eligible, but we know that those kind of work where people are too.
Mm-hmm.
So again, what I think we should also be offering them solutions for those really outlier areas as well, if we're going to be talking about, transit and services to the rural localities.
Adrian, you had a comment?
Yeah, just to react to Tiffany. Yeah, we would very much support.
Actually, I had my hand up first, but go ahead.
Sorry.
Just a quick comment, just say that we would support the 5311 as the operator, even if it was like a turnkey model and we were the transit agency to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Amy, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess, this is very helpful. And I think, it might be helpful to just kind of take a step back and sort of think about why this, the need for this group. And that was to talk just, about for the rural counties to be able to talk about what our needs are, right?
Right.
So I think, I see Dorona and Adrian kind of jumping in, trying to get ahead on funding and models, but I think we need to take a baseline of just what are the needs, right? And I think what we were trying to do, and I think what the TAC said was, the rural localities need to take the lead on this conversation. So New Kent, Hanover, to some degree, Chesterfield, and Goochland and Powhatan were kind of the required localities that really need to be in this conversation.
Right.
So I feel like what Tiffany has given is great, sort of a good overview of the different programs and all of that. But I do think that we need to just hear from Powhatan. We haven't really heard anything from a technical perspective from Powhatan. I know Goochland, Austin has been really good about, talking about their needs, but I think maybe we should just kind of start there and hear from the different localities of what our needs are, and then kind of build on that.
Sure.
And where we are and where we see ourselves going. I think the provider model needs to be looked at. I think there are other models out there that can maybe provide these services very well for us. We've had we as New Kent, we still can't get GRTC to come out and talk to us about the microtransit. That's been now for months and months and months. I've asked and they've said maybe soon. It never happens. So there's concern about that and their ability to kind of, do that. So I think we need to have, and we also already have a transit provider. We have Bay Transit.
Right.
And they're great. And in Charles City, let's not forget Charles City, right? Because they also provide service to Charles City. So I think building on that service and that model works very well. And that has nothing to do with GRTC. So I would like also for us to consider bringing in the other transit providers who actually deliver this kind of service, and they do it really well.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Amy, and keeping us centered, because we are talking about rural needs. I think that's really what the focus of this group is about. So thank you for those comments. And Barb, you have
Well, Adrian had her hand up right after. I think she needs to respond possibly to Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree as far as the purpose, and we are here to support. That's what we are for this whole discussion, and however GRTC can either help facilitate. I just wanted to provide Amy with an update that our consultants are aggressively working on preparing a survey. They're working on both kind of the external ones. They're working on researching Powhatan, as well as New Kent is going to be kind of that last one. But we are aiming to go live with Henrico County and Hanover in the next 2 weeks. So that's kind of been their focus. And then we'll be switching over in the month of November to focus on the rest. So sorry if communication has been lagging, but that is a huge priority to make sure that we get New Kent what they need as far as service, and want to make sure it is what provided for what your needs are. So don't think
at this point, we have had no input on that survey or any kind of communication. So that's all we need to say about that for right now. But we haven't had any.
I just don't want to be discredited as far as a provider. So putting that out there, we are definitely here to support and provide needs. And I feel like that statement was what was made. Thanks.
Dorani, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Yeah, a little bit. Thanks, Amy, for redirecting us. But one of the things that I was bringing up with the 5311, and Tiffany, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bay Transit receives 5311, right?
Correct.
So that's where I just wanted to kind of bring in that. So while it sounds like funding, it's also those providers that Tiffany talked about that are there. So yeah, I think it would be good though to have not only our urban provider, but potentially some of our rural providers at the table to maybe help come up with a solution as well.
Yeah, and I would just like to note back to Adrian, that was not a criticism towards GRTC. That was just our experience with trying to work with you on getting services out here. And the fact that we do have a transit provider that is doing a great job for us, I think needs to be noted, and they should be part of this conversation. That was the intent of my comment.
I think we're all back friends again. We can keep going.
Okay.
Are there
Go ahead, Barb.
Are there other thoughts from those that are part of this meeting? I know Charles City is missing, but Mike Cirillo from Powhatan and Austin Goin from Goochland. Other comments about as we work in our way into the needs section of this discussion?
Yeah, this is Austin with Goochland. I don't have much to add beyond what Amy mentioned as far as kind of the focus of the group being really what the needs are of the rural localities. I know Goochland in particular, we're kind of in a scenario where the county's so long and kind of diverse that we've got the east end of the county that I know Adrian, I believe we're meeting with you guys next week to discuss an extension of that line of the sheltering arms that I know has been a priority for everybody for a number of years now. But then on the far west end of the county, we're closer to Charlottesville, so we don't know what kind of options are available out that direction. I know we had discussed, Tiffany, I don't know if you were part of the call when I met with Grant Sparks or not. Yeah, you were. When discussing that 5311 and the feasibility study option, I guess one thing Goochland wants to know is if there's enough interest in getting a TPO wide rural study done. I think we'd be on board with that, but at a minimum, I think Goochland would probably want to maybe undertake our own feasibility analysis in that December 1 to February timeframe, just to see what options are available to us and what would best serve our needs.
All right, this is Mike Cirillo. I'm just come here from North Carolina, so getting my feet wet. But I was wondering if maybe it was appropriate for at least Goochland and Powhatan to get together and talk about doing a study, and just for me to get up to speed a little bit more. New Kent, I know, is on the other side, but certainly could be a part of that conversation.
I think that's a good point, Mike, because as you say, we have rural areas on either side of what's here in the central core, and the needs could be completely different. So that may be an idea to pursue as well, is looking at east needs and west needs. Certainly, hopefully some of the same models and solutions could apply to both, but the conditions might be different.
Right. My thinking is that, if you start out at a higher level where the rural counties sort of have a single meeting, let's identify what the options are, what works elsewhere, maybe bring folks up to speed, and then if there is the need to then break into two different groups or whatever number of groups there are to then work separately. I think that at least starting out as a single unit and then determining where to go from there. I think as just under the larger umbrella of rural transportation. In North Carolina, we have rural transportation planning organizations or regional, same thing, but North Carolina, the rural areas have their own MPOs, if you will. I was a director of those, so pretty familiar with rural transit, but understanding what the funding mechanisms are in Virginia is where I get a little bit hung up.
Sure. And a couple of things that I will provide to the group. I was hoping we would have a larger in-person turnout. I guess I mistakenly read the interest of our group, and we appreciate everybody being with us. But anyway, I will send to everyone. I've compiled a list of some previous studies that I think might have some bearing on this discussion today. These are studies done by Plan RVA, first of all, including our long-range transportation plan. And if you just bear with me, I'll just very briefly just list these so you can be aware of them. There was a regional park and ride investment strategy. There's a RVA transit vision plan. There's a rural long-range transportation plan. There was a plan that looked at needs and gaps assessment for the transportation disadvantaged, a regional transportation services guide, and the FY22 regional public transportation plan. And then plans done by GRTC include the regional microtransit study, a regional public transportation plan, their transit development plan, the north-south BRT study, the RVA transit vision plan, and a growth and expansion story map. And VDRPT has done a rural microtransit case study, the transit equity and modernization study, and the economic benefits of public transportation. So I will send you links to all of those studies, because I think that could help inform our discussion. I think it's, would help us to know some of the background, and I think many of us do, but it doesn't hurt to review those materials.
I can jump in for a second. I think, Mike, to your broader point, though, the purpose of today's meeting is really for us to understand those needs. I think this is the first step for that meeting, rather than having another meeting. We've already convened everyone under the TPO's framework, so we can discuss the needs today. And I think what we're hoping to get to is actionable next steps for us as the MPO. What do you need support with? What can we provide to help you guys get to the service that you want to see? So that was kind of the next items on the agenda. We're really more looking at what existing services do you have, what needs and what target audience are you looking for service. So I think that's really the intent of today's meeting, is getting into that. And then we can, like you said, decide whether we need to split the region or look at them separately.
Would any of our rural jurisdictions like to start off?
I mean, I can talk about, sort of what we have with Bay Transit.
Okay.
We have, and in fact, I am sorry that Charles City isn't here, because our service also goes into, or Bay Transit service that runs out of New Kent also serves Charles City.
Right.
So it's a service that runs like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's all trips, all people. So it's not just for transit needs or anything. It's for all trips, not elderly or disabled specifically. So we really have a whole sort of, I think, ridership coming out of all of our age sort of 55 and older communities that are really moving and developing out here. We have a couple of communities with thousands of homes, and really tapping into that demand, helping to have better trips to really to healthcare, I think is going to be a big need for us. And a lot of those services are outside of the county. We do have an ER right now, but we don't have any, primary care physician offices to speak of here. So, the need is to really help to get people outside of the county. I think that's a really big demand that we have for people living within the county. We are going to be experiencing a huge need for workforce, right? And we don't have housing to support the number of jobs that are getting ready to come here. And so it's going to be really important that we do have a good service that can also bring people here, not just take people from New Kent to services, but have a model where trips and access to jobs here is something that's viable for people. We're currently working with VDOT to expand our park and ride, and with that we will have bus facilities. So it will be it has been designed to allow for the bus to come in and go out very easily, and we will have a bus shelter. So that will help facilitate, whatever regional service we might be able to get into New Kent, as well as making connections for Bay Transit. So we have, sort of that happening and trying to put that into place. So I think it's just really going to be important that, and I think the Powhatan, Mr. Williams has said it numerous times on the meetings, is that in the rural settings, it's not a one size fits all. Right. And
Right.
I think we've been trying to find what is the one size that fits everybody. And I think GRTC has tried to facilitate some of that with the microtransit and try to fill that need. And that, I think that's good. I think that's definitely needed. But there are other pieces of rural transit and rural transportation that microtransit can't serve, and that it's a different model. If you look at Jaunt and Charlottesville area transit and how they work together, that is what comes to mind for me here, is that we really have a rural transportation provider and service that can fit that need while also working with, you know, a more urban type of service. So that may be something that we need to explore in terms of, you know, regional transit, but having that rural piece of it
Right.
fit in.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. Could we hear from somebody from Powhatan? Mike, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I need to look at the studies that you have. I don't really have anything to add. Like I said, I'm new. I mean, Powhatan, there's no really, there's no, we have small clusters of development.
Right.
Where potentially, you know, something that was more scheduled transit could work. Paratransit, I think, would work better out here, but, you know, I'd like to see our pattern of development. I think the goal here is to change the pattern of development. So that we will in the future have more clusters of developments which would be more supportive of more regularly scheduled sort of routes. But right now to me, it feels like this is, you know, paratransit land.
Right.
But I'd have to look a little bit more at what the studies are already. I mean, my gut is to say we need to study it, but you listed off a bunch of studies that, you know, I haven't seen, but I would like to see, and just see what work has already been done, so we're not, you know, reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, that was my intent in compiling those, is just to provide some background. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to those links, by the way. So thank you for sending those out.
Sure.
So Mike, this is Barbara. We have taken a quick look at Ride Assist, which is your paratransit service that is done through your social services department. And we do have some sense of that ridership pattern, which we, Sid, I think you've got access to those few slides that I put in there. Yeah. Thanks. Of course, this was kind of the backdrop of the microtransit study that was done by GRTC and is still in the works. You can go to the next slide.
You can press the arrow.
Oh, sorry. It's not going.
Oh, yeah, now you do it.
Yeah. So, and of course, was the top ranked zones in the rural areas, as well as, you know, immediately adjacent. And some of the statistics that they looked at are some of the same that we've looked at consistently, you know, as far as serving the paratransit or specialized transit, low income minority populations, the intersection density, presence of destinations, connections to bus routes, and the geographic distribution. That's also a consideration as part of the microtransit, but let's go next to what we see in, this is the Ride Assist program in Powhatan. These are the origins of the trips. So you can see they're scattered throughout the county. This is from the last 2 years. Get a good idea of, you know, of course, Route 60 running through the center to Powhatan, and then 522 on the far west side.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I don't know how the dots are distributed, but it's not what I would have expected.
Really?
I expected a larger dot at Powhatan. Yeah, because the larger dots, one's at Mosley, which is not on 6. I mean, none of the big dots are on 60.
Yeah. I mean, they're pretty dispersed. These are where the demand service is going.
But that's the pattern of development, essentially. And we don't have, the only retirement community we have in Powhatan is in the village, which is the smaller dot.
Right.
So I'd like to understand more about this geographic distribution. I don't know if you have that, if you've dug deeper into those details.
Well, this is just the current riders for the last 2 years that have made use of the Ride Assist program.
What's the relationship of the dot size.
Well, there's a
numbers.
concentration of more trips from those locations, from the
Right,
large.
no, I realize that, but I didn't know what numbers those represent.
I'll show you in a minute. That's what I'm
Okay.
getting to. A
Got-
little
Sorry,
bit.
sorry, thanks.
Next slide is showing destinations, which I found interesting in that they are going outside of the boundaries of Powhatan to the major medical centers. And this is the ride assist again. Of course, it is geared to the elderly, disabled, and those that meet those eligibility standards through the county's funding source, which is TANF funds largely right now. So this again is concentration of those destinations. And then the next slide gives you the numbers of where, the origins, of course, at those various residential locations and destinations, and where they are, what type of destination. So most of them are medical related. And that's just over the last 2 years. We're also trying to do this with Bay Transit. Their platform of reporting is a little confusing, and so we're still trying to work that out. It might be something, Amy, you could help us with as we could share the statistics we've gotten on ridership with you. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Barb. Just let me know.
Thanks.
And then Adrian has her hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick question. I don't know if it's for you or Mike. Is there a, going back a slide, is there a boundary limit for that particular service? I know it didn't go too far outside the boundary.
It doesn't appear, I don't know enough about, I was just saw this yesterday. We finally got through the ridership data. And so I was kind of surprised. I was pleased to see actually they can go outside of Powhatan.
I looked at Hanover Dash, and they actually had a very similar destination map that is overlaid here with their service.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I know they can go out 7 miles, and then to
Yeah,
some of the
7.
key medical centers like the VA and VCU Health, of course.
Barb, what is Reynolds Crossing?
It is it was the former office park of Reynolds Metals. It's right there at I-64 and Broad Street.
Okay.
And now there's several medical facilities in there. Virginia Eye Institute has some space in there. I think Virginia Urology, a couple other large practices have offices in that space.
I think there's dialysis as well.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think this illustrates kind of what I was trying to say earlier, is that, there's mobility beyond boundaries, right? People aren't just, and I think this is what Mr. Williams says, and I live in Powhatan, so I'm very familiar with that. But Mr. Williams has said it very well, is that just because somebody lives in one jurisdiction doesn't mean they want to stay in that jurisdiction, right? We all need to have regional mobility, and within reasonable time and reliability, right? So those are the fundamental things I think that rural transportation needs to achieve, just like urban transportation, fixed route has, the reliability and the frequency that's needed to make that service a success. The same is true for rural public transportation. And I think as we see our rural areas developing even more and more with residential that's now providing workforce, right, for other areas within the region, it makes it even more critical for us to be able to have reliable public transportation. So I really, I think we need to focus on a model and a provider that can help us to achieve that. And again, it's not a one size fits all.
Right.
And I don't think we're looking for fixed route service in rural counties.
Right.
It's dial up. You make it, and I mean, I would like to have a little better responsiveness, even with Bay Transit. Right now, it's a dial up, schedule your trip, you go, so it's a little antiquated in that regard. So I think we could make some improvements from that perspective. But the service and the reliability has always been there, which I think has served as a key factor in New Kent. So anyway, I think that's where we are.
Okay. Mike, did you have a comment? I see your hand is
I did.
up.
I did. This is a little bit broader picture, but one of the things that I noticed, and this is true in North Carolina as well, is that there's always a disconnect between the conversation about transit and the people who are talking about land use and design and development. And I think it's important, even in a rural context. This is what I was trying to do in North Carolina, was to focus on pattern of development, even in rural areas. That is eventually, at some point in the future, the goal is to aim for development that is transit, can be suited for transit-oriented development.
Right.
But I hear people saying in rural areas is that they want to preserve the rural landscape, but they also want to have community centers. And so if we adjust our land use rules and regulations and expectations to focus our development in rural areas, as we are in more urban counties, for example, in the longer term, we can look at things like fixed route rather than paratransit. We can look at placing our senior facilities and libraries and supermarkets and all the things that we see, those hotter dots, for example, in locations that when people get to those places, they can actually walk, or they live there, they can actually walk to a more fixed transit situation. I don't think that is something that needs to be, I think those conversations need to be happening as well and not in a vacuum.
Right. I want to make sure to give everybody an opportunity, and I think, see, Joe, you're on the call, I believe. You want to talk a little bit about some of the things in Hanover and some of the needs that are still there?
Right. Well, thank you. The Hanover Dash was referenced earlier. That's our elderly and disabled services, as I understand it, on demand. We are getting ready to be one of the first, or the first of 5 zones or regions in the region to roll out microtransit service. GRTC is initiating that effort with their link service that's going to serve our far western Mechanicsville area or thereabouts. So we'll be interested to see how that service is received. I guess just from my standpoint, it's you got to have to walk in somebody's shoes, and unfortunately, I don't live in Hanover, and I don't have I'm independent as far as transportation goes. So, anecdotally, I'd be very interested to know what people are hearing in terms of what are the unmet needs from a transportation standpoint in light of the services that exist today, that exist. And in all due respect, I mean, you can show me maps and heat zones and all of that, but just kind of at the very ground level, what are, when you do have those interactions, those of you that do, what are people saying specifically? Anecdotally, this is what I would like. If I could take costs out of the equation, take all those other factors out of the equation, if I could have my way, I would like X. What are those types of things? And I don't expect necessarily you all to have that answer right at the tip of your tongue, but I think that's what I would like to see the most, because I can't honestly answer that question. And it's hard for me to really talk about needs when I don't have that perspective.
Yeah. And one thing that hopefully can help with this discussion a little bit, and again, I'm sorry that I didn't get this out to you all in advance of the meeting, but we'll send it out along with the list of studies, is some information we have done. We've done some mapping of the region by, I think, the census tract level. And we've got our total population. We've mapped the population over age 65, low-income households, and households with zero car. So I think that can also help inform some of our discussion going forward, and you know, maybe help to pinpoint some areas that perhaps maybe we haven't thought about as far as where some of the needs might be. And we'll get that information out to everybody. But I just wanted to make you aware that we do have that information.
Yes, I know, and I do appreciate that part
Right.
of it, but I would really love to hear from the people, if you will, you know, what are people saying? What are you all hearing in terms of that? Because I mean, that's a logical place to start, would be in those demographics that you just described.
Right.
But what are people wanting? Again, take everything else out of the equation. If I could have my way, I would love to see X. What is that?
Right. Okay, good point. And I think, Dorona, do you have a comment?
Or Mike.
Or I don't know who was first, Dorona or Mike?
Mike was first.
All right, Mike, go ahead.
But he may have left his hand up from the other question.
All right,
I did, I'm sorry.
that's okay. Go ahead, Dorona.
Yeah, I was just gonna I was listening to what Joe was saying. So I guess I have one question for Tiffany. How does the human services coordinated plan and kind of what Joe's describing, what of course I would write as a rural transportation plan, because the only time you're going to get that, you know, ground public engagement on the needs assessment, it's going to be, you know, something that has to be undertaken. So that kind of goes back to what they were saying in regard to doing a consolidated type of plan that could uncover those needs. But I did want to know, Tiffany, how the human service coordinated plan plays into, you know, showing needs for the locality.
Well, that's going to be probably a weaker point for me in terms of my knowledge for coordinated human service plans, because that's mostly under our Section 5310 program manager. However, there was just an update and we just had the regional meetings that happened. There's a story map that kind of looks at it. And it really just kind of, I think, looks at more about the existing coverage provided by human service providers and being able to have that data that feeds into sources like our Virginia Navigator, which allows people to kind of do some trip planning in order to provide coverage that might be for those who are transit dependent. But the Coordinated Human Service Plan does have some data, and it is available online that can look at some of those areas in terms of needs. It may not be specific to just general transit, and maybe to your point about maybe paratransit ADA focused, but there are some components there. I guess it just depends. I mean, I think what I'm hearing in terms of this discussion is that there is not only a need to look at what would be transit feasibility or just needs in general as in terms of the desire of the county as well as the citizens that live within it. But I also, to Mike's point, I think it is important to maybe think about a component that is transit oriented development, or TOD, to kind of support those connections and linkages and provide that connection, outside of just the locality bounds. Whether that is going to be towards within GRTC or also with other providers. I did offer when I was presenting in September the opportunity that we could bring Bay, and if there are other providers that were interested in trying to just having a discussion, we could also bring that to this work group. But that is something that I'm not sure if that was the intent of convening the group. I think the intent was defining whether or not there was an interest to apply for a technical assistance grant through DRPT and what that study would look like, whether that is going to be something that's focused on the rural localities within the Richmond region and looking at transit feasibility and TOD, or if we're seeing that there may be more of an initiative for some of the localities to apply on their own, which they are eligible applicants, and how that's facilitated. I think one way or another, still needs to be a regional lens that needs to be applied in terms of making sure, to everyone's point, that we're not just focusing on transportation within locality bounds, but also where the origin destination data is going, where people are coming and going where they need to be. So I want to kind of just bring it back that I think that some of our localities are a little bit more prepared to kind of think of through what they want to look at versus others who are still trying to figure out what the service may look like or what's the need. Is it really just general transit? Is it paratransit? And I know a lot of this did start because of the conversations about Hanover Dash. So I want to make sure that before you all try to put together an application and go through this effort, that there is some consensus on what you want to look at in particular and what you want to apply for.
So if I could follow up with that, I guess, and ask you a question, Amy, kind of what Tiffany just described, in that it would take an entity to apply to DRPT for the technical assistance. And if we're looking at it to hopefully get maybe some uncovering needs of the rural plus ability for, TOD development, I guess what entity would we want to apply? Is that something that we could entrust GRTC to do and incorporate in the steering committee, identify rural providers like Bay Transit and all of those only because they are multi-jurisdictional right now? Or do we go to, I don't even know if Plan RVA is eligible to apply for the technical assistance they are. Or do we go to a Plan RVA and have them maybe put up a scope and ask them to help? Because a little bit what I'm hearing is that while there's technical assistance and here we need to apply, on the one hand, people are saying, we're not sure if we should be applying for what, because we don't know the needs that our community has.
Right.
Well, I guess that's, so I think, no, I don't think GRTC should be the one to lead this. I think this is something that the rural localities need to take the lead on. We have heard significant comment and discussion led by Powhatan County, Goochland County, primarily on how we really look at rural public transportation, that it is not a one size fits all. What we've seen and what GRTC, I think, has tried to do is put the microtransit lens on it, which said that doesn't fit everybody's need. So I think the rural localities, we need to come together, and whether that is through the TPO or one of the localities take the lead on writing that grant application, happy to do that. And I really believe we need to take the ownership of this, right? We need to take ownership of what the rural localities true needs are, and it's going to be very diverse. Yes, there needs to be human services. Yes, there needs to be all trips. It needs to be all times of day, 7 days a week. That is one limiting factor for us, which means funding. So, I really think that we need to take ownership of that and be able to now communicate back, come to agreement with what that study needs to look like, and then do it. And then, the onus is on us now to make sure that we do that. It's not up to GRTC to try to sort through all of that, right? They've tried to sort through it. So it's up to the localities that need to define what that is. And again, that's not a slight on GRTC. I think they've tried to step up. It's the localities that need to come in and define what that need is, and then go for that.
So do you think that this group would be beneficial in helping, like maybe we develop a scope together, or when I say the scope together, kind of like either an outline of the application, kind of the intent, so that we know that we're getting what we want to get out of the technical assistance. And when I say we, I'm just talking about the rurals and in general. And us, just think tanks. So yeah, I love if the locality leads it, but if this group could be, if there's something we could do, and like maybe, our goal is to help get the outline, or what, maybe we can come up, brainstorm.
No, I think that's great, Darwin. I just really think that we probably need to sit down the rural localities need to sit down. We need to talk and say, this is what we all need to get out of this collectively. And I don't think from Richmond or, you know, anywhere else, it's up to us. We were the ones that need to say, this is what our needs are.
And while I represent Richmond, I mean, I have extensive knowledge on rural transportation a long time.
Right.
And, you know, again, if you want to do it, fine, you know, I can bow out. But the thing is, we want to make sure that it links, it has that connectivity that we're all seeking. And
yeah,
that
I don't think anybody would ever suggest otherwise.
No, I agree.
Adrian, you had a comment?
Yes. Trying to remember exactly what it was. I feel like there's a lot of vehicles, I guess, kind of to accomplish this. For example, the Public Transportation Working Group was established for the purpose of getting regional collaboration and kind of really understanding the needs to go into the Regional Public Transportation Plan, which is a regional requirement for CVTA. So I feel like that already exists. And then all the studies, whether it was microtransit, were kind of a outcome of that working group. That was kind of what was the recommendation at that time, to do a study for that. I agree that it's not a one size fits all. And I think we've had some pretty great conversations with Powhatan, which I'm excited. Probably the next 2 weeks we'll be meeting back up with them. So heads up, Mike. We've made some progress on kind of making a commingling paratransit approach, where working with Mike and Brett and Mr. Williams, what they're actually, them understanding their need and looking at kind of what you shared, Barbara, and coming up with an approach that should hopefully kind of utilize P310 and P311 that looks at the greater Powhatan and looks at those outer service destinations that they're going in today for a very similar model as Dash. So we're hoping that that could be kind of a phase 2 of the Powhatan. First would be microtransit, and next would be kind of more of a commingling service that would hopefully help their more in need population. So microtransit was not something that we were just saying this is what we have. So definitely would support any others, whether it's GRTC or Plan RVA. I think that the effort would be owned by the region, whether it's the rurals, and could be, again, I know that Tiffany, that there requires a local match with any sort of study. So I don't know if the rules want to bring their own local match, or if that is something that should also be maybe approved through the Regional Public Transportation Plan match requirement through CVTA, to make sure it is something that's fruitful that the region does support. I don't know. I'm just saying there's so many different players that kind of all work together, that the rules can maybe have a subgroup that feeds into that, as well as I really would like to see something from the rurals in our transit strategic plan, so that that can actually be put on something that lives with DRPT, so it can be a priority that we give them something that fits, like no matter what we're doing, no matter what the jurisdiction, it should be something that works for that jurisdiction. Nothing should be forced, because they all vary. I mean, I would not say Powhatan is the same as New Kent. Ashland's very different, of course, from all of them. So working with each of them individually, whatever it might be, whoever the vehicle is, we would like to support.
Thank you. I think, Austin, you had a comment?
Yeah, actually, Amy and Adrian kind of touched on a couple things that I was going to talk about. I will second what Amy mentioned about, I think it's, the onus does kind of fall to the rural localities at the end of the day, that this is kind of our plan and how do we solve our needs. I'll say for Goochland County, you know, we haven't really undertaken the study to specifically identify the needs. I think we kind of know what they are anecdotally, but haven't put pen to paper and said officially, okay, we know exactly what our needs are, much like what was supplied for Powhatan. So I think we want to have those conversations as well and start moving towards, you know, identifying the needs specifically, moving to, okay, how do we best solve those needs? Mainline service, how do we start getting, is microtransit the option? Is it other providers? You know, it's really, we just want to start being in that conversation and attempting to figure out what transit, if any, we do need in the central and western part of the county.
Okay. Amy, you have another comment?
I just wanted to clarify, Adrian keeps mentioning the CVTA Public Transportation Working Group, but this was a TPO initiative, correct? So I don't know. I mean, we kind of split hairs on that a little bit, but I just want to make sure that we're operating under the guise of the TPO, not
Correct.
CDTA.
Correct. This is convening this group is in response to comments and requests from the TPO.
Correct. And the TAC specifically took action that the rule, then this was supposed to be a rural public transportation working group that was going to be led by the rural localities.
Yeah.
And the others, we were welcoming everybody to be part of that, but it needed to be led by the rural localities.
My sense of it was that it would be led by the rules, but it was felt like that there was some expertise, experience that could be
absolutely
gained from Richmond and Henrico from their experience in providing service. So that's why they were included in this conversation.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No problem with that whatsoever. But so I guess maybe the next step should be maybe Ken with you, me, Joe, Austin, Mike, and whoever wants to be on from Charles City could maybe come together, talk about what our scope of work would be, and then maybe work through you, Ken, or we'll work it out between ourselves on the applicant and how we get that accomplished.
Mark?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a reasonable path forward. We're here to facilitate and make whatever happen.
Okay.
For the rurals. Mike, do you still have your hand up, or did you have additional?
No, I actually had a brand new hand up. That's a brand new one.
Okay.
Brand new. I mean, I don't think that in Virginia that you have like magic money growing trees. I mean, maybe you do. I don't know. But I doubt it. And Powhatan County, this is, I hate to bring this back to this point, but I think we have to think about transit holistically. And I'm going to just raise this point because I think it's important. There's in Powhatan County, one of our biggest issues is Route 60. We can't continue to develop along Route 60 without compromising the function of that road. We all know this happens. I see it on my commute from Woodlake to Powhatan every day. I don't know if Chesterfield is in this mix, but what the heck are you doing? But where development happens and it gets built on roads that are just incapable of handling this development. And we got to look at this entire issue holistically, and transit fits into that. And in this context, I personally wouldn't dream of having a meeting without Richmond at the table, or whatever the other region, the larger animals are at the table, because our system, if it's separate, needs to feed into that. And eventually there's a regional system that we're all part of.
Yeah.
But it grows into that. But I would strongly suggest that the conversations that we have include that component of it, because we cannot continue to have development in Powhatan, even if it's transit oriented or whatever, because we can't continue to develop, because I know, unless you have the magic money tree, that there's no money available to me to widen 60. Right? I don't have a bottomless pit of money in Virginia to pay for fixing the problems of the development that we're creating. And that doesn't mean no development. What it means is to be more thoughtful. And when we're more thoughtful about that pattern of development, it helps build our transit systems. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I'll look forward to seeing you on Friday, Mike. We can have a great conversation about land use.
That's right. We do have the planning director's lunch on Friday, so that'll give us an opportunity to.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too.
Yeah, that'll be great.
I didn't think we'd have anything to talk about, but I guess we do.
Yeah, I think, and to your
welcome
point,
to Virginia.
Yeah.
Yay.
So I think it is a both and. We do need to look at both together. Land use is set, and it should not be independent of transportation by any means, but it's also a prerogative of the localities through your comp plans, and then your ordinances to, of course, implement those comp plans. So we're very cognizant of that. But I do think, as far as taking an overall phase one approach to defining the needs, And they may be different for each locality, of course, because you do have a component of some transit, whether it be for paratransit, specialized transit that serve, just Powhatan and then Hanover with the drive assist or the Hanover Dash. And then all users, all destinations, but confined, we think, more to the east, in Bay Transit with serving New Kent and Charles City. So those solutions are so varied that we already have. We could continue trying to map those so you could kind of see what's the pattern right now for demand. But that could also be part of that needs analysis, the overarching needs, and then picking up from a lot of the work that's already been done from demographics and, all the mapping that's been done in many of these previous studies. So we'd be happy to help facilitate that with the rurals. And I think that we got a clear indication, Mike, from the TAC that the larger jurisdictions should be included at their option. So we would want to make sure, and then we can bring in other providers in addition to GRTC. Does that sound like, I guess maybe we should think in terms of that next step as far as brainstorming on a scope of work for potential application or applications for the technical assistance, and maybe look to sometime in November. Does that sound?
When is your deadline? I'm sorry, Barb. Tiffany, was the deadline for that? Is that what you're saying is in December and February? So it'd be for next year's technical assistance?
Yes. So as you're familiar, our grant application cycle opens December 1st.
Okay.
So you have until February 1st to
So it'll
submit.
be, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So November would be fine for me, Barb.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I think we have time. I think we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that the deadline isn't till February 1st, so
Right.
we can
Yeah.
work out a good scope in that time frame, or maybe even before.
So Barb, you'll convene with the rules
Yes.
on that meeting? Okay. And then we're happy to send out, I guess then, once we get what we think the scope is, we can send it out for people to look at if they want to look at it, but and make comments on.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
And then Charles City will circle back to engage them and keep them posted on today's meeting.
Yeah.
For sure.
And in the meantime, I will send you some of that supporting information I have. I think it's some good background information. I don't know if I mentioned it or not. We've been talking about so much, it's kind of hard to keep track of everything. But Senior Connections has put together a summary, a list of the various providers, public as well as private nonprofit. And I think this might be helpful, to have this information in hand as well. These are mostly human services transportation providers, but again, I think that from what I've heard from the discussion is that, we're still not completely clear in terms of who we're trying to serve and what the needs are. And, whether it's an expanded human services transportation program or whether it's for the general public. So I think, we need to have an understanding and knowledge of the available services as well.
Okay.
Is there anything else, Barb?
I think so. John O'Keefe, you've been quiet. Are you still on?
Yes, ma'am, I'm still on.
Anything from your front?
No, and I was listening to what Amy had said. I know one of the things she had talked about was, some of the employment, coming there and some of it going out with some of the destinations in New Kent. I know they've got Buc-ee's coming in, I think AutoZone as well. So, Amy, in fact, I was going to send you an email after this just to remind you that, we're here to help. In fact, we do have another van pool coming out of New Kent starting next month, going up to Fort Belvoir. So there are a lot of people there, and I know you mentioned the expansion of the park and ride at Bottoms Bridge.
Right.
that definitely needs to be expanded because that's overflowing there.
Mhm.
And I think they go over to, some of the Food Lions or, some of the other, grocery stores in that area. But we do have several van pools coming out of the downtown or the Bottoms Bridge location. But I know exactly what you're talking about. So if there's anything we can do to help you out in that regards, just don't forget about van pooling as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Yeah,
And we
thanks,
love,
John.
we love Ride Finders. You guys are great. I think you're the best.
Thank you.
So we'll definitely get back in touch with you, John, and
Yes,
see how
ma'am.
we can expand that.
Yeah, and that's not a problem. Anything we can do to help, we'd love to work with you, Amy, and work with New Ken as well as any other localities.
Well,
Thank you, John.
Yes, ma'am.
Want to thank everybody for participating in our discussion this afternoon, and we'll be following up. I don't know that we need to schedule a meeting at this point.
No, I think
Just yet?
we'll have to find a good time that suits everyone. I want to make sure we definitely have all participants.
Hey,
for the
Barb.
next meeting. Yes, and Tiffany.
Yeah, so the only other thing I'll add is that when you have your next meeting and you're developing your scope, I think that there needs to be a clear identification of who's going to apply. And then again, I'll just want to make sure there's a reminder about that 50% local match, about where that's coming from. So if it is something that is of the initiative of the localities, I just want to be sure that they're aware about that.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And the local match is 15%?
50.
50.
50. 50. Okay,
50.
thank you. Thank you. All right,
Well,
appreciate that,
Tiffany,
Tiffany.
you will be invited to the meeting as well. And so
Thank
we
you.
want to make sure,
Yeah.
like I said, all the important players are at the table because you provide a great source of knowledge and direction. So thank you.
Well, thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate your time this
Yeah.
afternoon. I think this has
And
been,
we're also going to, I think for this next meeting, we'd really like to try to do it in person. I think it would be, our desire to have everyone around a real table. So if that's at all possible, we'll be looking for an appropriate time and date.
yeah, we have new chairs and tables, so come check them out.
Okay?
All right,
Thank you guys so much.
thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
Thank y'all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
have a good afternoon.
Too.
You too.
Bye-bye.